Good evening, and welcome to this 4th District Republican Congressional Forum. I'm Gwen Eklund, President of the Crawford County Republican Women. The COVID-19 pandemic has mandated that we adapt our plans, so tonight's panel are all safely participating in their homes or offices, communicating via Zoom. Your hosts are the Crawford County Republican Women, the Crawford County Republican Party, and KDSN Radio. We want to thank KDSN for the live broadcast. A live stream and replay link are available on each of the hosts' Facebook pages. We are delighted to have all 5 Republican candidates participating. As a reminder, absentee ballots are encouraged because of social distancing. Requests and completed ballots are now being accepted by your county auditor. If you do not have a requested ballot, you may find a request form online at the websites of the Secretary of State or your county auditor. The request form must be received in the county auditor's office by 5:00 p.m. on Friday, May 22nd, 11 days before the election.
Hi, I am Maura Saylor, Chair of the Crawford County Republican Party. Tonight, I'm going to tell everyone involved what the rules are for tonight. The rules have been circulated and agreed to by each of the candidates. So we will allow 2 minutes each for the candidates to provide opening remarks. Then we will do a question and answer forum. Tonight we have 10 questions total with 10 different topic areas. The questions were submitted by area Republicans for consideration. The candidates will get 2 minutes to respond to each question that's asked to them originally, and then we will allow 30 seconds for rebuttal. Each candidate who has not asked the original question will get an opportunity to provide a rebuttal either to the question posed or any of the response that was provided. After that, each candidate will get 1 minute for closing remarks. Tonight, our moderator is JC Van Ginkel from Atlantic, one of the co-owners of KDSN Radio in Denison. JC?
Thanks, Maura. A couple things to clarify. This is my disclaimer. I do not control the clock nor the microphones. It's kind of like Wizard of Oz. There's a guy behind the screen. His name's Darren. So if you have any complaints, talk to Darren. 2, this is kind of a version of Family Feud. We're going to visit about topics that have been submitted, as Maura indicated. Got a lot of questions from voters in the 4th District. The question committee has tried to combine them in a way that, some of the questions are hit at similar things, but come at it from different directions. We do have 10 areas to cover, and I'm going to tell you right now, I'm already breaking a rule. I'm adding a bonus question at the end, so everybody will have a shot at 30 seconds on that one. We'll go alphabetically, not from A to Z, but from F to T, and then from T to F. Each candidate will select a number between 1 and 10 and get a shot at the topic. So none of the participants have heard the questions before, and that just adds a little bit more of a randomness. So let's share your thoughts with the voters of the 4th District, and we'll start with Mr. Feenstra. And what I would like you to add to whatever it is you've already got written for your prepared script is, why are you running as a Republican? And I'd like everybody to answer that. So, Mr. Feenstra, fire away.
Well, I want to thank you for having me on tonight. I want to thank JC. I want to thank Gwen and others. This is wonderful. So I am Randy Feenstra. I'm a Christian, a husband, a father, and a constitutional conservative Republican. I'm running for Congress because the 4th District needs a seat at the table, an effective conservative voice in the process. To me, this election is all about real results, not campaign rhetoric. I served my community in the Iowa Senate for the past 12 years. I've been a leader on delivering numerous victories for our conservative movement. Among them, working with Governor Reynolds, I delivered the tax cuts by passing the largest income tax cut in Iowa history. I wrote and passed property tax relief measures to reduce the tax burden on Iowa families and farmers. I delivered for the pro-life movement. I was proud to defund Planned Parenthood, sponsor and the bill that defined life at conception, and supported an amendment to the Iowa Constitution to not grant the right to an abortion. I've been a champion for our Second Amendment rights, supporting the largest expansion of gun rights in Iowa history, supporting our stand on stand your ground laws, opposing red flag laws, and co-sponsoring constitutional carry. Finally, I delivered protections against illegal immigration, supporting Iowa's ban on sanctuary cities. These are campaign promises and not rhetoric. These are real results that I have been proud of to deliver for Iowa. In Congress, I'll continue to fight for these same priorities. I'll work with President Trump to build the wall and secure our border. I'll ensure that Planned Parenthood is defunded across the country. I'll defend Trump's tax cuts, and I'll be unwavering on my defense of the Second Amendment, fighting against red flag laws and other liberal schemes to infringe on our God-given rights. Our district and President Trump deserve an effective conservative in Congress. Thanks for your time this evening, and I'd be honored for your vote, and that is why I am a Republican.
Thank you. Mr. King, you're up.
All right, well, thanks for pulling this all together here tonight and letting me work from my living room where I've been for the last about 6 weeks since I came home from Washington. And I'd say first that where I'm sitting here at this desk has consumed nearly every waking moment, and I've had more waking moments because it's kept me awake dealing with this COVID-19 situation that we have, both nationally. I never thought that I would end up in Congress voting for trillions of dollars and so little debate and so few amendments, but sometimes heavily negotiated. And so I just arrived back here a day before yesterday on a red eye after a couple of days in Washington, putting that last tranche, maybe not the last one, the most recent tranche in to help our small businesses and bridge them out into this, a way that we can keep them, some of them in business. This is the toughest time, the most abrupt shock to our economic, our social, and our health system that this country has ever seen. And to get us back on the rails again is going to take some doing. And I put my energy into that. One of the things that I'll say just as a gift that I've long looked at the horizon and over the horizon. And how do we have solutions in place before the problem arises? Well, the problem arose without any solutions in place. And now I've been laying a path to get us back to work. We put information up on the database that'll help people. A number of things that I am asking for, but especially in this last days, I will just say to this that my stack is high of all the work that I've been doing, and we are faced with the euthanization of market-ready hogs, and that's going to start happening this week. So that's where my mind has been. People know where I stand, and I've stood on every conservative principle. I've run to the sound of the guns, and now I've walked through the fire for the last year and a half, and I've been tempered by that fire. People never know, people never wonder where I stand. They always know that full spectrum constitutional conservatism is my record, and it's not going to change going forward into the future.
Thank you. Next up, Steve Reeder.
Thank you, KDSN, and thank you, Crawford Women. I'm grateful that we could all have all 5 candidates so our 4th district constituents could hear exactly where each of the candidates stand on various issues. My wife, Brynn, and I have been praying that today finds people in our district healthy and ready to light up the open for business signs in our communities. I consider myself the non-establishment candidate in this primary. I've been, like our president, I've been in the commercial and industrial real estate brokerage and development business for 35 years. And like our president, I've been balancing checkbooks and running LLCs and running property management and making deals. And a president needs an ally that has a business mind that will help him in Congress. My goal is to take the power out of Congress. We've been seeing our government just overspend And I want to reassess our spending priorities. I'm in favor of things like Rand Paul's penny plan. I'm in favor of a fair and flat tax plan, earned income tax credits. I want to take the power out of Washington, and also I'm a fan of the Regulatory Freedom Amendment. Like our president, I think he's done a great job handling our border situations. And with this COVID situation, it's even more evident that we had to secure our borders. Right now, we're spending over $116 billion annually having illegals in our country. And I'm going to stand with our president to help secure that border so that we can let people come into our country legally. I'm also very pro-life, and I believe that I want to defend the sanctity of life and protect the unborn. Life starts at conception, and every life is precious. I also want to help work on the profitability of farmers. We need more market diversity and create more open markets for our farmers. Our education system, I have one daughter that's in education, another one's that's in mental health. And I've heard across the district that those are things we need to work on. And when I get to Washington, I want to work on those items. I was on a
I guess that's a 2-minute warning. Boom, gone. Thank you. Next up, Brett Richards. There you
Well,
are,
thank you,
Brett. There you
everyone.
go.
Thank you to everyone listening tonight. I actually want to start by asking you a question. Who solves more problems, you and your neighbors or politicians? I could sit down with any of my neighbors and solve more problems in 20 minutes than politicians have in years. When a politician tells you something, have you ever thought, what is he really saying? I wrote an amendment and I stood up for you. What they mean is nothing's going to happen, so I made a big show of it to make you think I tried. Or maybe I gave you a tax break. What I hear is they're running for office again. It's time that we change Washington before it changes us. In our communities, we take charge. We solve problems, create opportunities. In the past 14 months, traveling to over 250 campaign events, I put 70,000 miles on, and I've met a lot of islands I respect and trust. Those people tell me I remind them of someone they know. And people listening tonight, you might actually know me. I was born in Harlan and raised in Irwin, where I worked hard walking beans, changing tires in my parents' service station. I graduated college, married my high school sweetheart, Jill, and was commissioned in the Army as a combat engineer officer. My time as a soldier overseas came back to Irwin to grow our family business. In the same small town, we raise our family. Iowa is a great place to raise a family, but right now, I see opportunity and our values slipping away. The survival of our way of life is too important to trust just another politician. Let's send Congress an Iowa neighbor to get the job done. And I'd add, I'm running for Congress as a Republican because I know Republicans believe the people can do better than the government.
Thank you. Next up, Jeremy Taylor. Fire away.
Well, good evening. I'm appreciative of the opportunity to be here tonight, and we're facing a very critical time in our nation with threats from the outside, Iranian aggression, a Chinese coronavirus that is threatening the health of the American people as well as our economy, with over 26 million people now unemployed, and an unsecured border to our south. And yet, for all this crisis, we also have an internal crisis, and that's really from within. Abraham Lincoln said that America can never be destroyed from outside, and he was right. We're facing a moral and a spiritual crisis as a nation. And that's really a question of who we are and what we'll be. We'll either give to our children a fiscal inheritance or we'll saddle them with $25 trillion in debt. We'll have an unsecured border or we'll stand for the rule of law. And we'll either fight for the sanctity of human life, every human life, or we'll have the legacy of over 60 million unborn who never had the chance at life since Roe v. Wade. I'm somebody who got into this race because I believe that we need to preserve and protect the American dream. And to that end, we have to take back the United States House of Representatives from the likes of Nancy Pelosi. And in order to do so, we must hold the 4th district seat in Iowa, one that was almost lost to liberal J.D. Scholten. And that was before we lost committee assignments and a partnership with President Trump. Conservatives came to me and they asked me to run because they didn't want to just elect another Republican, establishment Republican who couldn't give a straight answer to straight questions. And so you'll have in me a constitutionalist, someone who in the Iowa House had an A ranking from the NRA and the American Conservative Union, 100% pro-life voting record, and passed significant pieces of legislation into law. Helped turn around our largest county in the 4th district for 5 years of lower tax levies. I met my wife, Kim, while I was teaching in Vietnam, and we're the parents of 6 wonderful kids. And after having grown up under socialism, Kim legally immigrated here and we're living the American dream. I'm an Army chaplain and major and feel called to serve for such a time as this.
Thank you. The questions have been kind of grouped, not kind of, they have been grouped, much like the platform. And some of these have maybe a couple extra parts to them, so have your pencil handy. Mr. Feenstra, pick a number between 1 and 10. Is that a 4?
4.
4? Well, let's see what number 4 is. Life. Each candidate thus far, all 5 of you have gone on the record, as well as the Democratic candidate, indicating that you're all pro-life. Republican voters would like to know specifically, how would you support and advance that right? And do you think there are exceptions to the general rule? And if so, what are those exceptions?
Well, that's a great question, JC. Thank you for that question. I am 100% and passionate pro-life, and I have a long record of supporting measures that have actually reduced abortions and that have saved lives for innocent babies. I oppose exceptions except for the life of a mother. As a father of 4, there is no more important duty for our elected officials than protecting innocent life. And during my time in the Iowa Senate, I have a 100% pro-life voting record. We passed the heartbeat bill, banned taxpayer-funded abortion, and defunded tax dollars from Planned Parenthood. This isn't rhetoric. This is real results that I've delivered for protecting innocent life. If I vote for any bill that will reduce the number of abortions, that's the way I'll always be done in Iowa, and I'll do the same thing in Congress.
Thank you. Anybody else? Let's see. We didn't really cover this. I guess, Mr. King, you'd be next if you want to share a few thoughts.
I do. And I do appreciate the question. And Randy knows what I'm going to say. The last time I heard him say that, it was in person in Fort Dodge, and he forgot to remind people that I'm actually the author of the heartbeat bill. I went to Ohio and filmed a movie to promote the heartbeat bill, drafted the legislation in Washington, took it all the way to 174 co-sponsors, and then I offered it into the state legislature. State Senator Jason Schultz carried that in for me. We kicked the language back several times, back and forth, until we were satisfied. I wrote the last language in the Iowa bill by hand into that so that it conformed with Doe versus Bolton. So we knew we were challenging the Supreme Court directly. And I lobbied that in the state legislature. I didn't have to do much in the state Senate because it moved quickly through there. But in the House, I had to work it really hard. And we finally got that 51st vote. And Iowa became, for a time, the #1 most pro-life state in the union. Also, there's at least another 9 states that have passed the heartbeat bill. We have a national movement. That national movement emanated out of Washington, D.C., out of the House of Representatives. And I had a full commitment to bring it up before the Judiciary Committee in the lame duck session. And that got pulled away from me in the last days for unknown reasons. So I think people know.
I guess that was 30 seconds worth. Thanks. Let's see, Mr. Taylor, you got your name or hand in the air.
Thank you very much. I believe as a Christian, a father, and as a faith leader that life is a gift from God and that there is no exceptions because all lives matter except for in the instance of the life of the mother being in jeopardy. I have put forward a defend life policy, 10 different pieces of legislation, including the federal heartbeat bill, the Down Syndrome Protection Act, any legislation that saves even a single life, I'm willing to sponsor, but it takes being on the Judiciary Committee. And that is where my heart's passion is. We have to be able to advance the cause of life. I'm also somebody who's willing to go against my own party if necessary. And I have a track record of having done so in the Iowa House as a matter of conscience. And so you'll find somebody in me who will always fight and champion the cause of life. And that's what I plan to do in Congress. Thank you.
Thank you. We're starting to learn how to run this machine, it looks like. I see blue hands over here. Mr. Reader, you're next up.
Thank you very much. And one element that is so important, and I've been educated on this because one of my daughters is in mental health and she's studying perinatal psychology. And both of my daughters have been champions of this and helping me understand this, is that's the mental component of this. There's an economic and an educational component of this, where the young women that are encountering an unexpected pregnancy, they need help, they need therapy, and I want to champion them to help them get through something like this and let them understand that every life is precious and that there are people that want that child.
Thank you. Mr. Richards, last but not least.
Well, thank you. And, you know, I do appreciate Congressman King reminding everyone that Jason Schultz and him did great things. But I hear a lot of people saying I did this, I did that. Well, guess what? 600, 700,000 babies are still murdered in the womb last year and every year going forward. We've got to do better. And it starts by us changing our culture. We got to do more. We got to ultimately change the hearts of people. And we got to increase adoption. We've got to end the funding of Planned Parenthood. Not one more dime should go to this, to Planned Parenthood.
Okay, thank you. Mr. King, you're next up. Give me a number between 1 and 10, but 4 has been taken.
Well, let's go to number 5.
Number 5, pandemic. Pandemic shows up all over the place, literally, as well as in the questions tonight. I checked the Iowa website earlier this afternoon, and as of yesterday morning, Iowa's had 118 deaths attributed to CV-19. We have 293 in the hospital, and they've given over 5,000 tests. The question is, in 2017, 578 Iowans died from the flu. And the latest data suggests that we'll be perhaps somewhere in the 400 range based upon projections, and who knows how that's going to work out. Plus untold billions of economic loss. So the question posed, part of it, has there been an overreaction on the part of the state and federal? And this is the first time in the nation's history that government has basically shut down the economy. So in your view, are the economic and social consequences of combating this virus equal to the risk posed?
Well, JC, I'd say first that we got to a place where it didn't pay to try to get an answer to that question in the middle of all the things that came at us. I don't think the president had any choice but to do what he did. And I think the governor has actually done a very good job in leading with confidence and making precise decisions along the way. However, I've been laying the groundwork to get our economy back and going again. And the website that you went to, it's a Iowa Department of Public Health's website. We did a number of things. One, you can go to steveking.house.gov. That's my congressional website. And we have a big COVID icon on there with all of the departments in government you can click on. And then you can go to find out what you need to find out. Another thing was there was no information available to identify those who had recovered from this. And so we pushed for that. It took over 2 weeks to get to some of that information. So we put it on our other website, steveking.com, that you can go there and see the by county or the state aggregate on how many have recovered from this virus. Another thing that I want to do is I want to get this economy open back up. I think the governor made the right decision in opening up hospitals and the conditions for it. But also we need to have the next step, I would say, open up our churches. We can socially distance ourselves in our churches. And if not, we'll just have a few more services. It won't hurt a thing. But that's the next thing that I think needs to happen. And then getting our small businesses up and going with responsible social distancing. And then there's another piece that's over on the horizon. I guess I need to answer your question too. Do I think we overreacted? Yes, to a degree, but I don't think the president had much choice. Now we need to get this country up and running and do so wisely. And one of the things that we need is all kinds of demographic data. So we can go on a website, click in our birth date, our age, our height, our pre-existing conditions, and learn what our risks are so we know how to step out into the.
Thank you. We'll come back to that in a minute. If you can look up, what is that website where you enter the information? I know I did it the other day. And the good news was it said, just keep doing what you're doing. Mr. Reader, you have thoughts?
To agree that there was probably an overreaction on the part of our government. When we first learned about the COVID-19 from the WHO, they gave us theoretical data on how many people would die, but today we have real data from all over the world. For example, the data on the number of people tested for COVID, it's far less than what the actual numbers are coming in. So currently they're considerably less. I've been in touch with 2 ER doctors, one in Bakersfield, California, and a good friend of mine in Chicago. And they're also telling me that initially their hospitals were flooded, but it's not nearly the numbers. I mean, we have as many people die from the flu.
I guess that's what 30 seconds feels like. Mr. Richards, thoughts?
Hear me? Yeah. Yes. So first of all, I think that President Trump and Governor Reynolds both did a good job reacting to the data they had as it developed. I'm glad we're making steps to open up the economy. Iowans are going to start working anyway because it's planting season. As a board chair of a regional healthcare center, I'm also very proud of the people that work, whether it's providers, the CEO, on down to the receptionists, the people that screen people as they're coming in to make sure we don't have a temperature. And we are ready to get back to work doing outpatient surgeries and seeing more people.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor?
Well, the American people have been protected by the leadership of President Trump, and I'm a believer in federalism, which means that the federal government should never dictate. It should be to the state governors and to local municipalities to start to now open up the economy. Brooklyn, Iowa, with a population of 1,500, is going to be treated differently than Brooklyn, New York. But we are in an unsustainable trajectory as far as federal spending. $2.2 trillion cannot be sustained yet again on a $23 trillion national debt. So we need to start to reopen our economy at this time in a safe and judicious manner.
All right, what do we got? Mr. Feenstra, you're last up on this question.
I worked with Governor Reynolds over the last 12 years, and I'm truly grateful. We have a thoughtful and reasoned governor who has taken a measured approach to this virus. I believe she's found a responsible balance in protecting the health of Iowans and the economic strength of our state. I trust her and President Trump's leadership during these crises, and I look forward to what's going to happen over the next several weeks as we slowly reopen.
Thank you. Next question, Mr. Reader, give me a number.
Number 8.
8. All right. National security. The United States is over 24 trillion in debt. And I believe that number is going up just about every other day, it seems like. Congress just authorized another 3 trillion in spending in response to the pandemic. Do you consider the nation's debt a threat to national security? And what will you do to return our nation to fiscal responsibility?
I do think,
Yep, you're good.
I do think that the debt is a serious threat to our sustainability of our national security. We saw for several administrations this globalization going on, and then President Trump steps into office and puts America first and says, we're going to put America first before all this globalization. And this spending that's been going on, over $1 trillion per year has created, it's not sustainable. And especially with the COVID going on right now, with GDP just gradually going up year by year, it's okay to, well, it's not okay, but Congress thought it was okay to keep overspending. But now with COVID, we're going to see that GDP leveling off. And now it's going to be more critical than ever. And that's why my son-in-law calls me a deficit hawk, because I'm so conservative, and that we just need to address a balanced budget amendment. And as I talked earlier in my opening statement, there's ways that are out there, and we need to cut spending.
Thank you. Mr. Richards?
Thank you for calling the debt a national security threat, because it is. And it's not just going up every day, it's going up every second. The amount of interest we pay in the next decade will be more than we pay for our entire defense of our country. We got to get spending under control. In the last 20 years, we had an increase from $6 trillion to $26 trillion. What Iowans telling me is it's time we get back to our principles, where we tighten our belt when things are tough. And that's exactly what we have to do in Congress.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor?
Thank you very much. Our national debt is a national security issue. And if we ever have a point where we're at 8% or more interest, we're not going to be able to service the interest. And as a chaplain, if I had a soldier come and say, I can't even pay the interest on all of my bills, then we're really at a problem. We have to pass the penny plan by Rand Paul. We have to have a balanced budget amendment. And we have to have those in our Republican Party that, once again, are Tea Party constitutionalists like myself, who are willing to go in and not just go along to get along, but roll up the sleeves and pass a balanced budget, the penny plan, and go and do the hard work that's required of us and for which we're called.
Thank you. Mr. Feenstra?
And deficit are significant challenges facing our future of our country. In Iowa, I helped deliver a 99% spending limit that I co-sponsored, which ensures that government does not spend more than they take in taxes. I support a 99% spending limit for the federal government, as well as to help the federal spending get it under control. These spending limitations that we have put in place in Iowa have led to economic successes that we have seen under Governor Branstad and Reynolds. We need this in our nation. This is so important for our families and for our future.
Thank you. Mr. King, your thoughts?
Sounds like they think they'll go to Washington and push the "that was easy" button, but it's not easy. And when I went into Washington, I went to the chairman of the budget committee and said, where's our balanced budget? Jim Nussel said, it's impossible to balance the budget. It took me 7 years of pounding on the table to even offer a balanced budget that balanced in 10 years. I had staff that put together the numbers for me. I didn't ask them to do it. They handed it to me one day and said, if Congress had followed your lead on only 7 different items, we would have balanced the budget and paid off the national debt. You aren't going to get that done out of 1 out of 435. I think I'd go with Brett Richards. You got to change the culture, and we need to send some people in from other districts that will join me.
Thank you. Mr. Richards, give me a number.
7.
7. That's a pretty good segue. National debt. There's a sub question here about military spending, whether it's enough, too high, too low. But the point of the question is, should Congress bail out states that are experiencing massive shortfalls in their budgets? For example, New York, New Jersey, Illinois, California. And that's one. And then secondly, what about states that were doing fine, but now facing budget shortfalls due to lack of revenue during the coronavirus problems?
Okay, so I heard, I think, 3 questions: military spending, our budget, and then states that properly allocate and the states that don't. That's quite the broad topic.
I'm
You
just
know,
a
I think
delivery
that
man. I'm just a delivery man.
military spending, you know, we did have to rebuild our military after 2 decades, almost 2 decades of war. I mean, my kids have never known a time when the nation's not at war. We've got to get back to getting ourselves on a peacetime footing there, pull our troops back. The states that have overspent for decades and decades under Democratic leadership, no, I don't think any of them should be bailed out. Absolutely not. They make their own choices. That's our government. You can live in a state that tries to live within its means or not. And their representatives have to make sure that they do things responsibly. The states that need help because of what's happened, you know, we're going to have time where we do look back and learn the lessons of what happened in the last 2-3 months. And we have got to get back to what a lot of Iowans say is, I save for those tough times. So why can't our government? You know, the people that sit on the boards of schools and nonprofit entities, they balance the budget. And if they don't, they can't print money. If they do, they go to jail. So why can't Congress get back to the principles that we all know what's important? And just to reiterate, since it's generally about balanced budget, I understand it's tough. I applaud anyone that tries to, but at some point in time, we have to get back to what the Constitution says is that the federal government should do what it's supposed to do and let the states do the rest of it. That's how we get into this. Because I can look my state representative or state senator, Jason Schultz, in the eye and tell him, why are you spending my hard-earned money or my neighbor's hard-earned money? In this, when you get at the national level.
Time's up. Thank you. Mr. Taylor, you have thoughts?
Yes, I do. So our family sits around and we have to balance our budget as states do, and the federal government has to as well. We need to have that balanced budget amendment, but we also have to have specifics. And you've heard others say, well, we need to do this, but you don't hear specifics. So I want to eliminate the use it or lose it mentality within the Department of Defense that costs us about $7.6 billion a year. Entitlement reform must happen, and the Department of Education has grown under George W. Bush and others, and Republicans have been weak on this issue. It's time that we stand as conservatives.
There was 30 seconds. Thank you. Mr. Feenstra, thoughts?
I've been in the Iowa Senate the last 12 years, and we've made some really tough decisions. 2008, 2009, we had to balance our budget, and we had to make some cuts. And that's what our nation has to do. I support that we need to rebuild our military, but we have to be responsible fiscally, just like every family and every business.
Mr. King?
Well, when we invest money in the military, all we're out is the raw materials, and we're keeping the labor force skilled. If we park a plane on a tarmac, then it's a deterrent and we get value out of that. That's a lot better than putting it into the welfare programs, where it is a disincentive for us to grow our economy. But the question, back on the issue, do we bail out the states? That answer is no. There are a bunch of states out there that didn't deserve it before this thing hit. Now, if there is a strong case, we're going to have to debate that in Congress and hear from each one of these states, weigh all of this, and come to a reasoned decision. I think it's too early to actually say no to the states that were responsible. I think it's we listen to the states that are responsible, put them into.
Thank you. Mr. Reader?
Thank you. I also agree that we should not be bailing out any states. When I go to Congress, every single vote that I take, I will make sure that it follows the US Constitution and represents the best interests of the sentiments of the people of Iowa. And I also feel that I'm a negotiator, and I'm willing to work across the aisle to start cutting spending. We see way too much spending internationally when it could be done right here in Iowa. mental health, I talked about earlier, infrastructure. We need it in our states and not spent overseas.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor, pick a number.
6.
6. Healthcare. Everybody's worried about their own health, and that's not just started in the last few months, but they're also concerned about healthcare costs. What do you believe, this is the first part, what do you believe the federal government's role is in healthcare? Secondly, and I've been promised that this did not come from Mr. Richards, but the concern is getting healthcare to the rural part of the country. Hospitals don't all get the same amount of reimbursement for same procedures, and based on the same equipment, whether it's in Denison, Iowa, Fort Dodge, or a metropolitan city of Pickett, Miami, Dallas, someplace like that. So how do you propose we address that inequality?
Well, thank you for the question. So when I approach healthcare, I approach it from free market principles of competition and choice. And so for me, I talked to a small businessman here in Sioux City. He had paid $54,000 toward his employees and their premiums. Well, after Obamacare was implemented, that cost went up to $217,000. Now you would think that each of his employees would be paying something less. That wasn't the case. Their contributions to their premiums went up as well. And so what happens is when you take on more into the system with fewer payers, you increase what everybody's going to pay. And so that's what happened under Obamacare. I'm somebody who is for the complete repeal of Obamacare to take it out by its roots, so to speak, and to make sure that we have transparency in pricing. It's only after you receive the billing do you see all of the different detail from the hospital or the provider on what went in, instead of being able to competitively look beforehand and have that transparency in pricing. I also think we need to have portability so that health savings accounts can move from employer to employer without having to lose coverage. And then finally, we need to have that kind of competition where one can shop for insurance across state lines. What happened at what I call the Unaffordable Care Act is that the federal government, and to the original question, mandated the kinds of plans that could be rolled out and on a tier of 3. And so instead of that, we need to have maximum choice, and we need to make sure that providers are reimbursed fairly, but that there's some uniformity in being able to have competition, which will actually drive down costs instead of greater government growth, which we saw didn't.
Thank you. Mr. Feenstra?
This is probably the #1 budget issue for businesses and families. First, Obamacare must be done once and for all. We must repeal it. We need market-based solutions that allow insurance to be sold across state lines. Drug prices must be slashed. Price transparency measurements must be implemented, and competition must be increased. I've done that here in Iowa, writing and passing the Farm Bureau Healthcare Plan, which is an alternative Obamacare plan. We did this with the help of hardworking Iowans who were being crushed by the excessive premiums of Obama.
That's a big topic for only 30 seconds, isn't it? Mr. King?
Well, thanks. I think people know that I'm the lead voice on the full 100% rip it out by the roots repeal of Obamacare. I'm hearing my words echo back in my ears here, and I remember that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. But some 80 times there's been all or part of Obamacare passed it, or the repeal passed in the House of Representatives, and I'm the original author of every foundation for that. But we need to do things too. I want the federal government out of the health insurance business. And then I want to facilitate selling insurance across state lines. And I passed already out of the House, not the Senate, the tort reform legislation that's there. There are a number of other things.
All right, Mr. Reader.
Thank
Your
you.
thoughts?
Absolutely. First of all, the first thing I want to say is I do not want to touch our seniors' Social Security and Medicare. That we have to keep in place because those people paid in, we got to take care of them and that. But I also want to emphasize that what we need is a true healthcare model and not a sick care model. Actually, food is the biggest cause of chronic disease. If we can get good food into our Northwest Iowa, which I consider kind of a food desert right now, that's how we can start, repairing and helping people get along healthy.
Thank you. Mr. Richards.
Yeah, thank you. Great question. In 2016, we had the House, the Senate, and the White House, and our party didn't do anything. We have been asleep at the switch. We've let the socialist Democrats steal the message. And if we don't act, we're going to get socialist medicine. The solution I hear from people that, since I serve on the hospital board, is very simple. Let the hospitals share best practices, give them incentives to reduce costs, encourage competition in every single area we can, and reduce administrative burden.
Thank you. I think I'm right. That's a big topic for 30 seconds. Mr. Taylor, pick another number. We'll work our way up.
Let's go with 8.
We already did 8.
9.
We've got 9.
Let's try 5.
No, I'm saying I have 9 around here somewhere.
Oh, okay.
There we are. Okay. Second Amendment. There's several pieces to this. The first one is a thought of, is there a need for suppressors, and it's also known as silencers in this day and age? If so, is waiting 18 months for federal approval appropriate? And if, what's the fix there? And then the third part is, do you support a national right to carry weapons initiative and getting rid of the requirement to have a permit to a permit to carry, under the theory that it's a constitutional right already? That wasn't very well said, but that's the drift. So fire away.
Great questions. Well, our nation's founders wrote the Second Amendment to enshrine in our Constitution our God-given rights as Americans. And you remember just a few years earlier that they had taken up arms against tyranny. And so as somebody who was an NRA member before being a military officer, I am fully behind our Second Amendment as a fundamental individual right. I'm against red flag legislation. I know we've had some concerns. There's a Main Street PAC that poured $100,000 into Randy Feenster's campaign. And I think Simon Conway brought that up yesterday, that they're in support of red flag legislation, which should be very disconcerting, despite otherwise having any rhetoric there. So as gun ownership has increased in areas, if you read John Lott's book, where there's more guns, there's actually less crime. I do believe that suppressors are something that people have a right to. And so whether or not there's some sort of federal requirement otherwise, I think that's an individual's individual right. We also need to have reciprocity. And that means that those who have that individual constitutional right, but that should be recognized in every other state. And I do believe constitutional carry should be the law of the land, and that you shouldn't have to be permitted otherwise. We have in place right now a NIC system. We have mental health background checks. It's the fidelity of those programs and making sure that those programs are being followed or shored up. And so for me, I'm somebody who, look, my wife grew up in Vietnam, and after Saigon fell in 1975 and the communists took over, the very first thing that they did was to disarm her family. And so I know that the left has always had an agenda to limit our freedoms. It's a freedom that I will, in Congress, that I will stand strong on. And I'm a Second Amendment believer to my core. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Feenstra?
I am a passionate supporter of the South. I have a lifetime A rating from the NRA because I've delivered results for our Second Amendment rights. I supported and passed the largest expansion of Second Amendment rights in Iowa history. I opposed red flag laws, supported Iowa's Stand Your Ground. I co-sponsored constitutional carry. I voted and passed the silencer bill. I've worked on and passed to protect hunters in our state and expanded Iowa's for youth. My record for delivering Second Amendment results is proven.
Thank you. Mr. King?
Membership card right there. And I'd say that my activities, if you take King Robinson, who's former president of the NRA at the national level, introduced me one day and he said, if the NRA had an A+++ rating, that's what Steve King would be rated. And I have also pushed for the suppressor and for constitutional carry, and it's my language in the federal bill that guarantees constitutional carry.
Thank you. Mr. Reeder?
Thank you. I'm also, as I've been championing here all along, I'm a firm believer in our Constitution. The Second Amendment is just as important as the others. I will stand behind it. All one has to do is go look into the metropolitan areas where they've tried to have strict gun control laws, and the crime with gun is out of control. I'm all for a national right to carry weapons.
Thank you. Mr. Richards?
God-given right to keep and bear arms doesn't need some politician taking credit for expanding our rights. We already have that right. I absolutely support constitutional carry. The Hearing Protection Act needs to be passed immediately. If you've ever been on a range and had someone fire next to you with a break, you know why you have to have a suppressor. Look, we are there to make sure that our God-given rights don't vanish and that Second Amendment protects all others.
Thank you. While you're up, 1, 2, 3, or 10?
Me?
You.
1, 2, 3. 2.
2. This is under the agriculture heading. We all believe, well, most of us believe, that capitalism works when competition is adequate. Statistics indicate that less than 20% of cattle are actually competitively bid by packers at this time. In fact, a side story, I had a guy in the other day working on his tax return. He told me that they had a couple of old cows that they pounded out. He got 77 cents, went in to settle up, and the ladies behind the counter told him they couldn't get hamburger for any less than $5.50. And he said, this is the exact animal that's going to turn into hamburger. What's with that? So in any event, what would you suggest happen in order to bring more competitiveness to ag markets, specifically livestock?
Well, thank you. I've lived in a rural community my whole life, and I know that Iowans are very proud of the fact that we feed the world, but we're starving our family farms and we're killing our communities. Farmers find themselves in a monopoly sandwich. It's not just on the production or the output side where we eat the hamburger, it's also on the inputs. 60% of the world supply of corn, beans is actually controlled by 4 companies. And I think it's actually a lot more today. That's a stat that's out there, but we've got to get a place where the DOJ enforces the monopoly laws to break up these monopolies that crush our family farms. Because we know that Iowa is and always will be an agriculture state. What we've got to do is completely expand more markets. Our ethanol industry, something that my family has grown with, our family business, because in 1977, we started selling gasohol. And right now, the ethanol industry is going to be hurting for a long time because the price of oil has collapsed. And so much of the market for our grains has vanished too. We've got to make sure that the RFS is solid, and we've got to make sure that that we don't let people like EPA Administrator Andrew Wheeler dictate that ethanol be limited like it has been, and also biodiesel, a very, very important product also. But we have to make sure that we take every single penny out of the raw product, manufacture it here before it goes other places.
There you have it. Mr. Taylor, as a hint of a question yet to come, the question was focused on livestock. We actually do have an ethanol question coming up. So, Mr. Taylor.
We need to be diligent in making sure that there is respect for transparency and pricing, that we're increasing that transparency, and that certain antitrust laws are enforced, especially when it comes to packers and to that industry. I'll also say this, we need to sit on the Ag Committee. Right now, we don't have that committee assignment for our congressional representative, and I think that's very important as we look at transparency and beef pricing, as we look at issues that are going to come up like the RFS and ethanol. 1 out of every 5 jobs in the 4th district is tied to ag. And so it's important that we have that representation going forward.
Thank you. Mr. Feenstra?
Right now, boxed beef is trading at $100 higher than live cattle, which means packers are making money on the backs of our hardworking Iowa farmers. That's wrong. The biggest thing we can do is have Trump Department of Justice investigate the packers for their unfair practices and stop this monopoly. I see this firsthand with my in-laws who have their huge hog and cattle operations. It's painful to watch how hard they work and only to lose large amounts of money on every animal that's going to market. This is why I recently wrote the letter to the Justice Department. I included Senator Grassley.
Thank you. Mr. King?
Well, Randy forgot to tell you, he poached my letter. I have sent a letter, a congressional letter, to the DOJ and also to Sonny Perdue at the USDA after I talked on the phone to both of those departments to let them know what I see going on out here. These arguments about boxed beef versus on the hoof are right. And we only have 4 packers in this country that are controlling 80% of the slaughter of our beef. We do need to do that, and we need transparent price reporting as a very important component of this.
Thank you. Mr. Reeder?
Thank you. And the antitrust laws do need to be enforced, but I think we need to take one step back and find out, how did we get there? There's all these special interest groups and these lobbyists that are running our federal agencies, and it's an incestuous relationship that needs to stop. I'm not taking any PAC money. I'm going to be very transparent when I go to Iowa. I want to make sure that all you got to do is follow the money to find out how these big companies get to the size that they're getting. We got to enforce those antitrust laws.
Thank you. While you're up, pick a number, 1, 3, or 10.
Let's do number 10.
10. A basic tenet of the Republican Party for years has been a belief in the free enterprise system and limited government. Knowing that not everybody can own their own restaurant or computer store or farm, what could be done to help those stuck in lower paying jobs to achieve American prosperity?
Well, it all comes from, getting everybody a good education and opportunity. And that's what's great about our government, is that it allows free enterprise and ingenuity. When I started out, I had no money, but in our country, I was able to go out, get family and friends and neighbors to, invest in my idea to make it work. I'm reluctant, other than, Small Business Administration loans, to get the federal government, but I think it stems back to education, making sure that our kids have a decent education and they learn entrepreneurship skills, they learn, civics, and learn about how great our country is and the opportunities that we have. So it stems from education.
Thank you. Mr. Richards, thoughts?
Yeah, so I grew up in business, literally since the time I was 7. My mom and dad started a business, and Jill and I came back. And so we've seen good times, bad times, and how you grow rural business and rural prosperity is to get the government out of the way. It is all tied together. Our agriculture and our businesses and our success in Iowa, because we are and always will be an agriculture state. So we do have to keep doing things that actually allow us to refine.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor.
Owners who have taken risk and reward, and opportunities need to be there. And so that means education is the greatest means of upward mobility in a free and democratic society. We need to ensure that government allows people to keep more of their personal income to be able to start a small business and invest, and gets out of the way with these rules and regulations. Congress passes about 150 pieces of legislation every year. That hasn't changed, but we're to 60,000 pages of rules and regulations on the Federal Register. We need to create freedom and economic opportunity for people.
Thank you. Mr. Feenstra.
Very simple. We must reduce federal spending. We must reduce federal regulations. We must allow folks to keep more of their money, expand the economy. This will help raise wages and make our economy grow. We also need a strong workforce, and we can do that through skills training and apprenticeships, through our colleges, community colleges, and even our high schools. This is where it starts. We need to build the foundation and inspire our youth.
Thank you. And Mr. King.
Well, I actually passed legislation off the floor of the House of Representatives in the form of an amendment that requires each agency to serve up 10% of their regulations each year to Congress, requiring an up or down vote. We can amend it if we choose. All regulations under my legislation that passed the House gets sunsets in a period of 10 years. So we strip this regulation down and we listen to the people when we do it. No one even had that idea, and I pass it off the floor of the House of Representatives.
Thank you. You're up again. 1 or 3?
Let's go with number 1.
Number 1 it is. This is kind of a long one. It's under the Constitution heading. I haven't read it recently, but I don't remember anything about the Bill of Rights or Constitution suggesting that fundamental rights can be taken away by the government in a time of emergency. So it's really a 3-part question. The first is, what about infringing upon the right of religion and assembly? Is that different than shutting down businesses and free enterprise? And then the third part, and this was raised several times, so we're going to put it in here. What do you believe your role is as a public figure, as a representative, to speak up if you believe at some point either the government or perhaps the governor has overstepped bounds as you believe them to be?
That is one of the most difficult constitutional questions that has come before us in a long time. And I asked myself those questions immediately when these issues came up and we started to see our constitutional rights being trampled. And the first thing that troubles me is the First Amendment, especially the right to freely worship. And right behind that is assembly, as you said. But what I saw the emergency that we were in, and I personally decided I'm not going to throw that wrench into the gears because there's a national crisis at work. And I don't want to undercut the people that are leading on this. I want to support the best solution that we can get. We're coming out the other side. You've heard me say earlier tonight that I'm working to put us back to work. And once we've got the hospitals that are opened up now. Second thing, churches, that's a priority. That is assembly. And so I want to work down that path, but we need to look back in the rearview mirror once this is settled and examine this and find out what precedents we might have inadvertently created that can be exploited in the future under circumstances that may be similar. So that's how I would look at this. I'd like to tell you that I'd be rigid in constitutional rights and say they don't have any right to do these things. But governors have some emergency powers that they have utilized, not the president of the United States, but the emergency powers of the governors. And so that's where this thing sets, is that I've chaired the Constitution Committee. Everybody knows that I'm the one that they look to when it says about constitutional principles in the House of Representatives. Closing down a business, that's not as intense a constitutional issue as either assembly or religion. Businesses get closed down regularly because of regulation, because of taxes, because of law violation. But when we do this to people and shut their business down, we have an obligation to try to get them ramped back up again and try to lay the foundation to make them whole.
Thank you. Mr. Reader, you're
Okay, just had to unmute there. Absolutely. And I agree with the congressman, that the Bill of Rights, we didn't need to follow the Constitution and follow the Bill of Rights and make sure, and what it comes down to is, on the ballots down, the governorships and the mayorships, we have to make sure that we're electing people that follow the Constitution. When you get governors like the one in Michigan and that wants to start exercising rights that
there we are. My question must have been too windy. You cut me off. Who we got? Mr. Richards, your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. I encourage everybody to go to my website, richardforcongress.com, or go to Iowa Standard and look at my April 16th article that I wrote about this. We need to rethink the emergency powers we've given our governor. I do think Governor Reynolds does a great job trying to balance what she sees as important and critical. But 29C, there is an overreach. A benevolent governor is great now, but what about a Chet Culver or someone else in the future that wouldn't be so good to our Bill of Rights?
Thank you. Mr. Taylor.
Constitutionalist, and I believe that these rights cannot be taken away. I'm a faith leader and a chaplain who always pushes our First Amendment rights for our soldiers. And I do believe that some governors overextended and trampled on the Constitution. Governor Whitmer was brought up. Attorney General Barr sent specific examples of those who targeted folks who were in church parking lots, and yet a mile away were able to drive through. And so I think we have to be very careful lest we go the way of the socialist left in preserving our religious liberties.
Thank you. Mr. Feenstra.
Fundamental right, the First Amendment, that this should never be infringed. Our governor is in a very difficult situation, and she is balancing all that needs to be done when it comes to our rights, our economy, our safety, and it's a tough time. But I look forward, I see a bright light that things are going to start happening, and we'll be able to gather again, and that will be a blessing. This is a difficult time right now, but we should never have our rights infringed.
We have one question left. Would you like to pick number 3?
Hey, I'll take number 3. How's that?
Perfect. You can't have a political event in the 4th district without talking about corn and ethanol. So here it comes. Iowa is the #1 biofuel producer, creates jobs in rural communities, and adds value to every bushel of corn for Iowa farmers. The industry is clearly in crisis. We've shut down at least 10 ethanol plants in Iowa as of the other day, and I don't know what the current number is. Question: should the federal government take action to ensure that the industry can survive and come back online during the recovery?
First of all, I feel for our ethanol plants. They're getting crushed just like our farming community, and they go hand in hand. And yes, our government needs to help them. We need them to step in. And I'll tell you where they can help. The small refinery waivers from the EPA, they must stop. EPA Director Wheeler, he's been out of control, and this is completely unjust, crushing our ethanol plants. The renewable fuel standard mandate volume must be increased. And I have helped write a bill that will pass when we get back into session that pushes E15 into more of our ethanol and biodiesel that we sold in our state. The crops are so vital to ethanol production. And yet, if the ethanol plants are not open, where do we go with all these millions of bushels of crop? Distiller grain also is so essential to our cattle farmers. This is the grain that the wet feed or dry feed that they feed the rations to cattle. This is gone if our ethanol plants don't reopen. This is a crushing blow in the 4th district. I am supported by the biofuels industry because they know I will get things done and I will be their passionate advocate when I get to DC.
Mr. King, your thoughts on federal government and ethanol?
Well, I think we're going to have to step in and lend a hand, but I don't think it's the situation that's nearly as urgent as our livestock producers are today. So I want to focus on those priorities. I want to get all of our slaughter plants up and running. I want to get the crews in there well taken care of. I want to get that meat going down the line, and I don't want to have to euthanize one more hog than we have to. Once we get that out of the way, we can turn around and look and see what we can do with our ethanol plants. Is they're caught in this situation. It's really bad, especially because the petroleum industry had a negative price at $37 a barrel. We never thought.
Mr. Reeder, ethanol.
Yes. Well, here's another situation where we got into this with the government subsidizing, getting involved. And it goes back to what I've been calling for in the beginning is diversification for our farmers. We don't need to be putting all of our eggs in one basket with, having global trade of corn and having it all dumped into animal feed and ethanol. We need diversification.
Thank you. Mr. Richards?
Yeah, as I said, my family business has been selling gas haul since 1978. We're the first ones in Shelby County to do it. We've always been an advocate for biofuels. We've wanted higher blends at the federal level, and we've worked towards that. I've heard politicians say they own things when they're good, but then when it's bad, they're not taking it up and getting the mantle going. I actually am the only candidate, I think, in this race that has called for EPA Minister Wheeler to be fired because he has devastated our ethanol industry, and we can actually fix it if we follow laws right now we have on the books.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor?
So we must uphold the RFS. We have to have a congressman who can push that issue on the Ag Committee. 4 billion gallons means 4 billion gallons. I appreciate Randy saying this needs to be done, but there's no plan attached to that. We need to hold the US EPA accountable, and we have congressional purse strings to say, we're going to reduce your budget by this 15% every year until you implement what Congress has actually passed. Iowa corn growers deserve it. Our ag community is relying upon it, and it's high time that it needs to happen.
Thank you. Now we start the bonus round. This is my question. There's 435 members of Congress. That means that each individual sitting there has a little less than 0.25% say so. If you had control of the House, Senate, and President's chair for one day and had to return after that day, what one piece of legislation would you push to have passed? One. Mr. Feenstra?
I would support pro-life with no exceptions and make sure every child has the right to live in our nation. Every child created by God has a purpose and a reason to live in our country. And that's the first and #1 thing I would do.
Thank you. Mr. King? One bill.
Did pro-life without exceptions for rape and incest. And he said that was his #1 fundraising event that he put out there. And so, but what I would do is I would bring the heartbeat bill and I would add personhood to the heartbeat bill. I'm very close to having the votes to getting that passed out of the House, but you said House, Senate, President's signature. I'd like to have you guarantee the Supreme Court also.
We don't get to vote on that. Mr. Reeder?
At this juncture, I would probably work on balancing our budget. I just think that we have to concentrate on that and make sure that the spending is going appropriately in the right places and cut the unnecessary spending. That would probably be what I would work on.
Thank you. Mr. Richards?
Well, look, in 2016, we had it for a lot more than one day. We had it for 2 years. So what I would do is pass term limits, because then we can get rid of people like Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, Maxine Waters, and Dick Durbin, all those lifetime people that prevent us from passing pro-life legislation, our balanced budgets, and everything else that we know we have to pass. So that's what I'm going to do, is we're going to get rid of everyone out there and make sure we have citizen legislators.
Okay, Mr. Taylor.
Bring up a great scenario. And this is what I've heard on the campaign trail over the last 75 events and 17,000 miles. Why didn't Republicans, when they had control of the House, the Senate, and the presidency, do what they said that they were going to do? And so for me, they didn't cut $1 billion on $4.75 trillion of debt. They didn't stand for life, secure the border, or repeal Obamacare. So if I had that situation in which I could do all of this, it would come to the most fundamental issue, and that is life. It's passing a federal heartbeat bill along with personhood. We need somebody who can sit in judiciary and be able to introduce that. That's why Martin Cannon, who...
Thank you. Time for closing. Everybody gets a minute to give us a pitch. Why should the voters in the 4th District put you on the ballot for next November? Mr. Feenstra, you're top of the list.
Well, I want to thank you for this wonderful debate this evening. As I said earlier, I'm Randy Feenstra. I'm a Christian, a husband, a father, and a constitutional conservative Republican. I'm running for Congress because the 4th District needs a seat at the table and an effective conservative voice in the process. To me, this election is about real results, not campaign rhetoric. I served my community in the Iowa Senate for the past 12 years. I've been a leader on delivering numerous victories for our conservative movement. I've delivered tax cuts. I delivered for the pro-life movement. I delivered for our Second Amendment rights. Finally, I delivered on protections against illegal immigration. In Congress, I'll continue to fight for these same priorities. Alongside President Trump, we'll build the wall, we'll secure our borders, we'll defund Planned Parenthood, we'll protect the Trump tax cuts, and we will be unwavering in defending the Second Amendment. Our district and president deserve effective conservative leaders in Congress. Thanks for your time this evening. I'd be honored to have your vote.
Thank you. Mr. King.
Back to, they think there's a "that was easy" button that you push in Washington, D.C. No, this stuff isn't easy, but I actually have delivered. I'm not just telling you that I have, and voting for our pro-life bill doesn't mean that you led on it. Here are some of the things that are part of it. I have never let you down. I stood up years ago and told you what I believed in. I said, I'll use this seat to move the political center to the right, and I'll burn the candle at both ends, and when I run out of wax, I'll come home. All of those things. No one thinks I'm out of wax, by the way, but here are the things that I own, and I had to earn them to do that. Renewable fuels, Second Amendment, repeal of Obamacare, the immigration issue, and secure borders. Everybody knows that. And also the life issue. Those are all important issues. They're all part of the platform in the Republican Party. I've also led on the presidential campaigns, and I was first in the nation. And I'm paying a price for that with these primaries, because some sore losers want to have somebody that's going to be able to nominate someone who is an elitist and maybe a rhino.
Thank you. Mr. Reeder.
Thank you. Well, I have a real simple message that I've been championing from the beginning of getting in this race. It's limited government, more faith, and more freedom. And the world is full of thinkers and doers, and I'm a doer. I'm an innovator, and I'm a communicator. We've had career politicians in the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives for decades. Congress has the worst approval rating in years, and career politicians got us into this mess, and Trump has been doing an awesome job of getting us out of it. Jared Kushner made a statement that I just loved when I was at CPAC this year. And he said that when Trump got into the White House, that the establishment just thought, oh, he will conform just like all the rest of them. But Mr. Trump stood his ground, which he's been doing for 3.5 years. And he said, you're going to conform to the way I do business. I'm a businessman just like Mr. Trump. And if you share my belief in strong families, strong communities, and a strong Iowa, I'd like to ask for your support and your vote. If you share my
Thank you. Mr. Richards.
Decide who to vote for. Consider my education as a civil engineer, my service in the Army, and my role in a family business that employed more than 300 Iowans. As an engineer, I look at problems logically and solve them. As in the family business, my job was to create opportunities, work together, and listen to the public. Can you think of any place that needs those skills more than our dysfunctional federal government? I'm running because you deserve someone who will put you, your family, and your neighbors at the center of everything he does. We elected an unpolished businessman to be president for a reason. We believe our country's future was too important to be controlled by mainstream establishment elites and their values. It's time for Iowans to change DC. Thank you to our sponsors, moderators, KDSN, and most of all the listeners. I appreciate your support and ask for your vote on June 2nd.
Whoops, I'm on. All right. Mr. Taylor, you get the last word.
Well, we must have an electable constitutionalist who can defeat J.D. Scholten, take the U.S. House back, and partner with this president. Right now, we don't have that in Congress. So you know that I'll fight for life, balanced budgets, the Second Amendment, repealing Obamacare, a secure border, and for our freedoms. When I served in communist Vietnam, I learned what it meant to live without freedom. Faith leaders who were harassed, freedom of speech suppressed, and the government dictating the number of children. And so when President Trump says America will never be a socialist country, I know I will stand up and applaud in Congress. My wife and I were once on a train in Vietnam where we met someone that was in the same communist re-education camp where her dad was put to death. And this man whispered to us, America is very good, because he secretly listened to Ronald Reagan speak of the city on a hill and the speaking of hope. Well, Reagan also said we must fight for our freedoms lest they be gone in one generation. Well, I'm honored to be able to fight for you, for your family, for our freedoms, and for the 4th District, and be honored to represent you in Congress. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. I kind of fibbed. You don't get the last word. I do. I've got about 3.5 thoughts here. First, for the candidates, as well as anybody that only got in on part of it, the forum will be available for review on kdsnradio.com. I think JJ said he was going to try to put under the news tab. So if you want to review or settle bets on, he said that, that's the place to go. Number 2, KDSN operates under a license granted by the Federal Communications Commission. We've been talking about federal stuff all night. Our charge here at KDSN is to serve the public interests. And we believe that we do that by providing a source for local news, local weather, local sports, things of interest to our local community. We view tonight's forum as a matter of public interest, and we hope to do it again next fall for other contested races. Lastly, but most importantly, thanks to you, to each and every one of the 5 of you for participating tonight. You did a great job. And to the listener, remember to vote on June 2nd in person, or get an absentee ballot and do it by mail. So the important part is we have a right to vote. Let's go exercise it. So with that, thank you one and all.